Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. This one is going to be another one of those reviews where I basically spoil the entire book, just giving the content warnings. So if you don't want to be spoiled, then I guess skip it. And also be very aware that a lot of fairly common content aspects that could bring something forth in people's brains is within this book. So we have some content warnings for sexual assault, sexual abuse, rape, including the sexual assault of a minor. We have cutting, domestic abuse, physical assault, suicide ideation, and a suicide attempt. This is by far the darkest book I have ever reviewed. And we will get into it. So be on the lookout that there's going to be a lot of discussions on these topics within this review. And so this review might actually trigger something. So, be cautious of that as well. Today, I am reviewing The Secrets We Keep by Sakeya Barnes. This is all about a teenage girl who is being sexually abused by her uncle. And it's a little bit strange because there seems to be a disconnect between the actual story on the page and the synopsis, because the synopsis makes it sound like she's keeping all these secrets, living with her grandmother, and then when a social worker comes in and she realizes that she could go into foster care, she is like galvanized to do something. But that doesn't really happen in the story. But part of the reason I was interested in the book was because the inclusion of foster care. If you've been around my channel for a bit, you may know I am a foster parent, and so I am always intrigued by books that have inclusions in the system and how they take them. And I will get into how it represented that later. But the actual story, things kind of just seem to happen to the protagonist. She doesn't make a ton of very big decisions other than keeping her silence. And when it comes to the protagonist, I honestly cannot remember if the author told me if this was based on real life events or not. I don't know where the email went in my inbox. I usually keep especially good track of those kind of emails, so I can't remember if she said whether or not it was, which is good because I also can't remember whether or not she said it was common knowledge. So we're just going to go under the we don't know how own voices this is aspect and move forward. So with that in mind, this book gets incredibly graphic. There are, if I remember correctly, 2 scenes involving sexual assault, including molestation of a minor, and then there are 2 rape scenes, and they are on page. You see every aspect of what's happening in detail. So that became a thing, and led to one of my biggest struggles with the book, in that theoretically, this book is meant to be about overcoming. It is meant to be catharsis in that the protagonist is a survivor and gets through all of this and takes the steps to get through the trauma and get to better mental health. The problem is that based purely on page count within the book, there are more pages dedicated to the trauma than to the recovery of it. Like I mentioned before, there are 4 scenes that are played out on page, taking up several pages each, whereas later in the book, when they start talking about her going to a mental hospital, the entirety of her time in mental hospital gets half a page. And it leaves you with this kind of gross feeling because you spent more time in the dark place than in the moving to the light, hopeful place. And I saw another review that said, I don't see what the point of the trauma was in the book, and I can see why that review thought that, because with so much of it and so little focus on overcoming, it does feel a little bit like rubbernecking, like you're just staring at this horrible stuff to stare at the horrible stuff. There were some parts with overcoming, specifically she does go to a foster home, and I did enjoy the depiction of it. It wasn't a generic the generic kind of abusive foster home that the media loves to portray because they don't understand the complexities that kids feel living in a home that is objectively healthier than where they were living before, but still loving and missing their families. And this did it pretty well. The whole, like, she liked her new family, but still missed her grandmother. And I really liked that just juxtaposition. There was so little of it in comparison to all of the horrible stuff. And when you're going to do, in-depth suicide ideation, following through all of those horrible, dark thoughts, you need to give the reader a lot of time on the other side. You need to give them a lot of time to come back from that. It's kind of like when you watch a horror movie and then you have to spend longer watching, like, happier things after the horror movie before you go to bed to, like, get your head back, like that kind of thing. The other struggle I had with the book was the writing style. The writing style had one of my pet peeves, which is complete lack, or not complete lack, but mostly lacking in contractions, and in fiction novels it is completely fine to use contractions. The only time where it's, like, not okay is in, like, formal academic writing, but this is a YA novel and first person point of view, so it really should have a more relaxed style. And also the writing felt very basic to the point that it almost felt like it was written for a specific grade of grade school, if that makes sense. There was a lot of repeating phrases and a lot of very, very simplistic language that at times almost made it feel like I was reading one of the pieces I would read to the kids I work with, because the language was that simple and that repetitive. Like phrases like, "My mother let me in the house. My mother always took her time letting me in the house. My mother," like, multiple phrases would start with the phrase "my mother" or end with the same phrase, or would have very short, simplistic sentences and not a lot of descriptions. And it was very strange because it felt like a very young, like, beginning reader writing style, but exceedingly adult content. So it didn't gel together at all. There are also a lot of continuity issues. Her grandmother gets ill, but in one place it is named as this illness, in another place it is named as a different one. In one place, Lily writes in her diary, "So-and-so said I love you today," but when I went through and reread the entirety of the scenes with that character, that was never said. So it really could have used a little bit more editing in that aspect. And I usually don't bring up editing in my reviews because it is such a basic aspect that, by the sheer nature of continuing to write and better their craft, writers will just naturally get better at it. So the basic copy edits I don't usually comment on, but they were here in a large enough portion that I felt that I need to say something. So in general, I ended up giving this book 2 stars. The concept is there. The ideas are there. I applaud the author for being willing to speak so boldly on such dark topics, but it needed a lot more reformatting in the dark versus like recovering from the dark, trauma versus overcoming trauma. If the point of the book was the overcoming, you need a lot more time spent on that. In general, if you have like one rape scene, you need to have like 100 pages minimum recovering from it. Same with cutting or a suicide attempt. Like, you really need to give the time to let the reader come back to base and feel like all of that horrible trauma meant something and wasn't just on the page to be a horrible thing you read about, if that makes sense. Dark books aren't like fluffy books in which they can just exist for the sake of the content inside, because we really don't want to live in a world where a bunch of people are looking to read those horrible, rubbernecking, dark topics because they just enjoy reading horrible, dark topics. Like, I don't want to live in a world where someone just genuinely thinks to themselves, I really want to read a rape scene today. Like, not a world I want to live in. Regardless, This book still could have merit if you are interested in it. Again, really be careful with all those content warnings going into it. Darkest book I've ever read for sure, but I did appreciate the foster parent representation. I thought that was very well done. And beyond that, if you are well prepared, you could definitely get something out of this book. So I am still closed for the foreseeable future because I am taking my sweet time in getting through review books. So it will likely be months at least. And I'm surprisingly not that brokenhearted about it. I think I'm finally learning that it's okay to not be super duper productive in my reading. Personal growth, everybody. Regardless, but nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.